come now and speak.
They can't hear you, or anyway. They'll be able to hear you. You know how to project your voice.
Not really. Hello, my name's Veronica Lyons. I'm the Secretary of the Launceston Jazz Club. I'd like to speak to you about the history and the activities of the Launceston Jazz Club. It was formed in 1988, a year or so after the demise of the Jazz Action Society, which went embarrassingly broke. Next year, we will be celebrating our 35th birthday. Functions were initially held at the Launceston Bowls Club on Sunday afternoons, moved to the Batman and Faulkner Hotel, and then had a long association with the Royal Oak Hotel under the patronage of Bruce Potter. COVID-19 saw a move to the Boathouse Centre in Lindsay Street, where there was more room to safely distance. We are currently enjoying a successful tenure there. Back in 1988, the musicians weren't paid as we didn't have any money. Over the years, we gradually built up their fee and started paying a travelling fee for those from out of town. These fees and other expenses are covered by the entry fee to events and a raffle and a lucky number card and an annual membership fee. Functions are held once a month on the last Tuesday, sometimes on the Sunday afternoon, or sometimes on another night if there's a touring band or musician who is only here for certain days. Bands are a mixture of local musicians and those from Hobart, North West Coast and Longford, as well as mainland ones on tour. These latter ones are usually on some sort of grant, so we fortunately only have to pay their fee, not their airfares and accommodation. We tried to present a range of genres depending on the availability of bands. Every year we celebrate International Jazz Day, which is the 30th of April. This year, as it occurred on a Saturday, we decided to have an all-day event and a jazz trip on the Tamar Odyssey. We were fortunate to receive a community grant from the Launceston City Council to help us with this very successful day. Several years ago, we ran some festivals where we presented musicians from all over the state. We have also had spectacular birthday parties for our 21st and 30th. And we have a Christmas party each year, which is free for the members to thank them for all their support. A small committee of 8 makes all this happen. We currently have 178 members, including 13 life members, and our monthly functions are regularly attracting an audience of over 100. We advertise our functions by a monthly newsletter, Facebook page and on City Park Radio. Members regularly attend other events in Longford, Hobart, St Helens, Devonport and Ulverston, and also mainland festivals such as Newcastle and Inverloch and the annual Australian Jazz Convention. We really like live jazz. When I'm asked what sort of jazz do I like, I always say live. People say, oh, what? I don't sit at home listening to records or CDs.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And I must say, my wife and I were there, and the Deputy Mayor was there for that Jazz Day, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. So
yes.
Appreciated that. It was fantastic.
And thanks for your help.
And your enthusiasm is very evident. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So public questions on notice is there with the comments, answers, public questions without notice. Any public questions without notice?
I hope the mic is working in here. Good afternoon, Councillors Mayor. The glasses on. The question to Council is in regard to public
your name and address, please.
All right, so Helen Tate, 67 Burke Street. Question to the Council is in regard to public open space, the public open space contribution required for a subdivision. This question applies to when a DA is being assessed. My question applies to when a DA is being assessed as a combined application for rezoning plus subsequent development, which comes before you today for the Launceston Golf Course. The question is, does the required 5% dollar value of public open space contribution be assessed before or after the rezoning?
Richard, are you answering that? Oh, there's three. You wait till the end to
one
answer
question.
all three together?
Yes,
Thank
I think
you.
I will put them on notice because I would like a thorough answer to these ones. So then the question on that is, what is the situation in regard to the two recent DAs for the Launceston Golf Course? Because if the assessment comes after the change from recreation to residential, well then the land value would be considerably greater, and I'm interested to know the rationale either way. So the question is, what's regard to the two recent DAs for the golf course? And I have a third question. It's a little bit different, but it's really relating to the same. No, well, it's a new question. So good management of natural drainage lines has ramifications for the whole city, flooding downstream, the loss of visual amenity and biodiversity values. So my question is, when a subdivision is proposed beside a natural drainage line, what provisions are made to protect and or rehabilitate further the natural values and the ecosystem services provided to the adjacent properties and to the city by that streamline? So, as I say, I think I'll put those on notice.
Thank you. I'll get Richard to answer the questions. Thank you. Just go to the back one, Richard. Probably the better one.
So, with regard to the open space contribution, that is assessed on the unimproved value of the land at the time the final plan of survey is sealed. And that's normally determined by a valuer at that time. With regard to the two recent DAs for the golf club, neither of the plan of surveys have been sealed, so no valuations have been made at this time. And with regard to how drainage lines are assessed within subdivisions, it's a little bit hard to speculate because it's largely dependent on the circumstances, but the natural values code in the planning scheme applies, and there would be a series of things to have regard to depending on the circumstances.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public? Thank you. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 9 as planning authority. So we have 9.1. We do have some speakers for 9.1. First of all, Andrew McKillop.
Andrew McKillop?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Mayor. My name is Andrew McKillop and I live at 1074 Pipers River Road, directly opposite the land of the DA 2402022. I'm representing my wife, Ellie Atkinson, and neighbours Stuart and Rosemary Leader. I'm here today to highlight a major flaw in the DA. The documents provided on the council in the council website, there is no Telstra cable diagram. This diagram is obtainable through Dial Before You Dig and is freely accessible, and shows there is a 100mm fibre optic cable running through both 1065 and our property 1074 and ex-councillor Stuart Leader's property to the south on Wattles Road, plus other properties to the north and south. This cable is one of the main cable networks for northern Tasmania. There is a very clear warning relating to all properties that this is a critical network route. Telstra has confirmed that this cable has significant monetary value and cannot be repaired if damaged. It would have to be replaced at significant cost. this would run well into six figures. In my written representation, I advised that there was no easement. The response in the minutes by the town planner states, and I quote, "There are no easements registered on either of the CTs. Telstra cabling is covered by statutory easements and are not included in titles. It would have been found if the owner, the architect and the applicant had done their due diligence." Telstra's Office of Network Integrity has confirmed as of the 10th of August at 12:45 p.m. that no person responsible for this DA has been in touch. Telstra has further confirmed they will allow nothing to damage their infrastructure. Telstra advised me that nothing would be allowed to come within 5 metres of the cable. This would mean the proposed septic trenching, which is, in my opinion, on top of the cable, would need to be moved. This would mean that septic trenching mentioned in the DA would be within this distance and possibly the house itself on the plans designed. Secondly, until the cable is located through physical confirmation, no action can be taken by any party and distance is verified. There is a very strong warning in the documents that state, and I quote, "It is a criminal offence under the Criminal Code Act 1995 to tamper or interfere with telecommunications infrastructure." There is also further warning. Telstra will seek compensation for damage caused to its property and losses caused to Telstra and its customers. I'm aware of a recent incident in Launceston where this ran into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Consequential damage could potentially affect properties along the cable line if replacement is needed, and the property owners would be able to also potentially lodge a claim. I would like to think Council has a duty of care to protect other companies' infrastructure. In my written representation, I noted there was a fibre optic cable, ergo Council is aware. Regarding point 1.1 on page 19 of the minutes under the proposal, what is stated is incorrect. I had written and verbal correspondence with the Council due to the lack of a postal card coming to our address. In the call on the 19th of January at 16:34 from my mobile logs, I was advised that Council would not take the Department of State Growth Road upgrade into account and that any objections should focus on the positioning of the proposed dwelling and its impacts. My wife's original representation was lodged at 14:03 on the 24th and mine was done at 10:54 on the 1st of February. Notice that the original DA would be decided at Council was the 14th of February. On the 16th of February, Council rang me to advise that the first DA was being withdrawn. I received written confirmation at 15:38 that day from Planning Administration. Personally, I was advised that the DA had been withdrawn because it failed for 2 reasons: setbacks and access. I asked what was required for the design to succeed. The response was the house had to be moved further north. In the second DA, the house has not moved. I would draw during your visit this morning, Council would also have noticed that our property has grazing animals and we are covered by a Dipwe Pick Code. I would question whether there needs to be a setback the same as for the property to the north that is noted in your current deliberations. I thank you for your time and your consideration. Apologies for my bad delivery.
No, thank you. Thank you. Is that all of them, or?
Yep, I have documents here which...
Andrew was speaking on behalf of a few other people as well. That's why it was a bit longer, in case you weren't. Yep.
Just so you're aware, this is a freely obtainable document. It is Telstra's cable diagram.
Okay.
The warning is very clear on there. It states the plant location must be found first, and it says the exact... Telstra will seek compensation, which is what I quoted.
Yep.
There is a further thing which came with the document. It's very clear. It's a criminal offence.
Yep. Thank you.
That's what I'm quoting. I'm quoting straight from open source documents.
Appreciate that. Your time is up now. So.
In my correspondence, I do have all copies of written correspondence, and I still have my voice logs.
Good.
From my conversations with the planning department.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good.
sir. I appreciate your time.
That's a pleasure. Thank you. George Walker. Might need a raise. Bit high. Raise it up.
Oh, that's all right. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. Thank you. George Walker, 60 Degrees, the applicant. The address is, or our address is Suite 103, 287 Charles Street in Launceston. So the Planning Authority item 9.1 is for a boundary adjustment between two small lots and for a new single dwelling to be located on the vacant lot. It's a second application for the site. The first application was for a similar application, albeit with the location of the proposed dwelling positioned closer to the southeastern boundary, which adjoins Pipers River Road. Upon referral of the first application to the Department of State Growth, who's the road authority for Pipers River Road, we became aware of the intention and advancement of the proposed upgrade of the junction between Pipers River Road and Waddles Road, which is directly opposite the site on the southern side of Pipers River Road. Their proposed junction upgrades require the acquisition of a portion of the proposed vacant lot, and DSG indicated their concerns with the siting of the proposed dwelling relative to the land that's required to be acquired in order to facilitate the junction upgrades. It was evident at the time that the siting of the dwelling in the first application was unable to satisfy the performance criteria 26.4.3 P3E, which required consideration of any proposed upgrades to adjoining roads with respect to frontage setbacks. Failure to satisfy performance criteria results in the refusal of an application. Subsequently, the application was withdrawn and we liaised with the Department of State Growth until such a time as a new junction design was resolved, noting that the other discretions within the previous application had been satisfied. The current application accounts for the new junction design that has been supported by DSG. Matters relating to road safety have therefore been resolved, along with matters relating to the impact of agricultural land, which has been presented by the report by RMCG, bushfire and on-site wastewater management. Just with respect to the Telstra line, we did become aware of its location due to the designs that have been done by the Department of State Growth. We're certainly aware of it. We understand that the concept design for the septic treatment system may impact that area. We'll obviously be making sure that it doesn't impact the Telstra line, obviously for the best interest of the local community and also for the back pocket of the client. We're therefore seeking your support in approval of the application, which is recommended in item 9.1.
Well, right on your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers for 9.1? Thank you. So we have item 9.1. Somebody happy to move? Councillor McKenzie moved. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to Councillor McKenzie?
I did, thank you, and thank you for Representative Hall's comments, and thank you for the comments from 60 Degrees, which actually clarify some of those issues. Again, before I start, can I just ask a question as to what telecom line does in relation to that planning decision? Is that an issue that we need to consider?
Richard.
There's no specific planning requirements for telecom lines, but there are other legislative requirements which have been outlined, but not specific to the planning decision.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Richard. So just well, there have been a number of discretions that have been looked at in relation to this, and some of them are setbacks, whether it's a rural resource as to whether it's a rural land. There have been expert reports saying that it's not really viable for agricultural purposes, being the size of the block, and therefore decisions in regards to the building of a dwelling are somewhat changed as a result of that. As a consequence of that, our planners have gone through all of the various issues and all of the discretions required in relation to it. The telecom one's one that's been raised and I think answered by Mr Walker in his comments back, and clearly the other legislative issues need to be dealt with by the proponent in relation to building their house, and if they don't, then the consequences are A, illegal according to what was said, and B, a significant cost to them if they happen to cut through those lines. So clearly it will be in their best interest to ensure that that does not occur. Again, a number of other representations were in relation to sight lines, traffic management and so forth like that. But clearly by looking at what we looked at today on the bus trip, we can see where the proposed road changes are, which actually takes a lot of the big bend out and actually straightens it, which will actually improve the sight lines. There's a tree on the corner which currently would probably impinge sight lines coming out, which clearly as part of the road development is going to have to go because the road goes straight through where the tree is. So arguably as a result of the road reorganisation, there'll be a lot better vision for all traffic coming out of Waddles Road and down the Pipers River Road as well. So I believe that in relation to the concepts in regards to traffic management and so forth like that, even though it's a state road and it's not something that we actually deal with under the planning scheme, it's actually something the state roads have needed to deal with. They're satisfied that the issues in regards to sight lines and the safety of the road in relation to putting this development through are okay. And as a consequence of that, from a planning point of view, it's not actually an issue that we need to take into account because it's already been dealt with. So in my opinion in regards to the discretions that have been made, there are talks about setback being 200 metres. Clearly that's not the case and you couldn't do it on this size block, otherwise you wouldn't have anywhere to build because of the setbacks on the back. And looking at other locations, other houses in locations around that, clearly none of those houses have been set back 200 metres from the boundaries. Some are 25, arguably this is closer to the road than the other houses, but according to the planner and their discretion in relation to where it's set back, it's still safe and it's reasonable from the roadside for us to approve this today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for giving a good summary of that one. I might just make a short comment for the record of the Telstra cable. In my 35 years at Telstra, part of my job was, in fact, to send out the bill for people who chose to or chose not to locate the cable and cut it, or, in fact, having realised they had a cable on there, to relocate it. And simply that is all that would be required should the cable be, in fact, in the way, whether it be their drainage trench, the location of the house, they would have to pay for it to be relocated, and that's done at a full commercial rate. So therefore, Telstra actually would make money on it, and I assumed it still would because it would still be Telstra's main infrastructure that runs between exchanges. That would be the optic fibre rather than distribution to the households. So from that point of view, the Telstra cable issue is a bit of a non-issue. It could cost them more money if it's in the wrong spot. The only way to address that is by actually locating it on site, and there's a process called dial before you dig to do that. My only other comment about this one that Councillor Mackenzie hasn't quoted is over time people's land use changes, and when you look at the shape of these two roughly 1 acre blocks, they're a bit strange in being big triangles and stuff, and moving the boundary to create two almost squarish type blocks seems a logical solution. It does enable another house to be built on what is a 1 acre block. And whilst we want to keep agricultural land for agricultural purposes, particularly good agricultural land, as the report said, when you're only at 1 acre block, there is limited use that can be used for. And so perhaps the extra house there is simply the use of that land. That is a suitable use of the land. So I'm quite happy to support this DA with the amendments that have been made.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Question, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. So it's a zoned rural resource, not agriculture, I'm told. What would normally be the reasons why we would allow a residential dwelling on a rural resource block of any sort?
Just to be clear, this is being assessed under the previous planning scheme. So the agriculture zone and the rural zone come in under the new scheme, and the rural resource zone is a zone that exists under the previous scheme, just to be clear on which scheme we're deciding it under. The tests for houses in rural resource zone, it allows a number of possible pathways, but generally speaking, there would be two options, either to be an integral part of or supporting a rural resource use, as in something that makes use of the rural resource, or alternatively, it would need to be demonstrated that what you're doing is not compromising the ability for rural resources to be used. And that's the pathway that this application's chosen, and that's supported by a report from an agricultural specialist, which is attached to the papers.
Thank you. One question?
Yes, but nonetheless, there is a list of permitted uses for for rural resource land, isn't there? That, as you mentioned, that was the aforementioned option. That, and the second option being that it's not impeding any alternative rural resource type uses, but there must be an abundance of people who own rural resource land who cannot build a house on there without meeting one of those criteria.
Richard.
In order to get a house approved in the rural resource zone, you have to meet the requirements of the planning scheme. And there are a number of different ways to do that. It's a little bit hard to speculate on who may or may not be able to, but there are a number of houses get constructed in the rural resource zone, and it really depends on the circumstances.
More questions, if I may, Mayor. When it comes to the septic, the drainage, and the size of the land, it's been deemed that it would be a suitable size land to deal with the volume of waste water. But in consideration of that we don't have an exact plan for that at the moment, and also, I suppose, in consideration of this Telstra cable, could it be that we're approving something that will not be able to meet the requirements for that service?
We're not required to assess the detail of the septic system, although it is as part of the assessment of the subdivision, we should be confident that the blocks are of a size and of a nature that the effluent can be treated on site, and that's what we are with this. We haven't got a detailed design because that would come later at the building stage and when plumbing permits are assessed. But we have no concerns about the capacity of the land to accept the effluent and dispose of it on site. And as pointed out by Councillor Harris, if it turns out that the cable presents a problem, which isn't necessarily known at this point, but if it does, then it may be that the cable has to be moved. And that's
I
possible.
suppose that, my concern obviously is that we approve something.
Are you speaking now? Or
no, I'm not. Just to reply to that statement. And I suppose the only other point is that obviously it's a separate title, but being a separate title doesn't sort of have any impact on whether or not an approval should be granted. I mean, it would be on rural resource possible to have more than one house on one title, would it?
Richard, multiple dwellings aren't allowable.
They are?
No.
They're not allowable, that's right.
No, I mean, some farms have two houses if they're related to the operations of farms and caretakers' cottages, so there's a little bit of give and take, but two residential properties on a rural resource property is not allowable for residential purposes, no. So each house has to have its own title.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do wish to speak. And, of course, I don't know if it's been elucidated so far, but it's a convoluted process here because, on the one hand, we have the state government making decisions about road realignments that has impacted upon this property, and so they've had to have their own negotiations. And when we're voting today, we're not voting on that road realignment. We're simply voting on the approval of this particular dwelling and the boundary adjustment, thank you, and also associated considerations. And so I can understand the concern of representatives who have said, look, this it's brought that issue up for them, whether it's the side road, whether it's the main road there that is being impacted. And, we have to trust the state government in that regard as to what they've decided to do for those roads. So we need to separate that from the argument. My concern is with that block's ability to contain that house and the associated drainage, wastewater. I suppose we're told that, yes, there is enough space there, We're not to take into consideration the Telstra cable, another thing that we're not to consider today, even though we know it's there. I'm not exactly sure where. So it's understandable that the representatives can see that these problems, and indeed, if and when this goes ahead, some of those problems may rear their head. It's also difficult when it is rural resource and the primary use for that land is for rural pursuits, of which there are a varied list. It might be beekeeping, it might be, of course, agricultural pursuits and things like that. Hardly likely on a small block like this, but nonetheless, there is a fairly defined list of the things that are appropriate there. It can also be Airbnbs. Accommodation can be seen as a rural resource, permitted use, I do believe. But that's none of these things that this is applying for. It's applying for a house on a rural resource block with no rural resource attached, uses attached. So I'm a little bit undecided because of all that. I would appreciate it if any other councillor has any opinions about that. I accept that it's a small block and it's difficult to say that, yes, it could be used for, any other of these rural pursuits, but, this is quite often what happens, that there are various industries and uses that can be applied to a small rural block. So I'm still cogitating on that, but I'm happy to hear from anyone else. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I stand to support this application, and I suppose just following off from Councillor Walker, we don't have any say into what the highest and best use of a proposal is. In this particular, we've got a road. DSG are handling that, and it's going to be improved sight lines, improved driveway crossover. Telstra, well, Telstra is between the property owner and Telstra, or Optus, if they've got a line there. I think they might go overhead. Councillor Harris, I'm not sure. The boundary realignment, the setbacks, the drainage, they're the things that we're concentrating on, and I'm happy and confident with the performance criteria that they've met, and I support our planners.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Yeah, just finally, just making a couple of comments. There's been a report done by Michael Tempest of RMCG outlining the issues in relation to the rurality of it and the ability for use for practical primary production purposes, which has reached the conclusion that it's not suitable for that purpose, and therefore under a rural resource you can then go ahead and do the development as being proposed. So there's been a professional person who's actually given advice in regards to that. We've had professional people being our planners who have said that the site is capable of dealing with the wastewater. Yes, there's the issue relating to the Telstra cable that's has been brought up, and clearly there seems to be an issue there. I think the architects and designers have come out and said, yes, we need to consider that, and then they'll have to come back and determine whether the cable needs to be moved or whether they need to look at a different place to put their wastewater removal in it. Our planners have said that the site can cope with it. I think that answers the questions.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We go to 9.2. We do have some speakers for 9.2, which is the Launceston Golf Club. First of all, James Stewart.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
I just see, James, you just...
Is this working?
Yeah, it is working,
Yeah, sure.
I think.
Sorry.
It is for our recording, not for out there.
Okay, thank you. My name's James Stewart. I'm a town planner with Woolcott Surveys, who are the applicants for the rezone and subdivision application at the Launceston Golf Club. I'm here today to talk in favour of the planner's recommendation to continue supporting the amendment for a partial rezone and subdivision and recommended approval to the Tasmanian Planning Commission. We've reviewed all of the concerns which were raised during the 28-day advertising period. This application does not change the existing character of Kings Meadows. It simply expands on the existing residential portion of land within the town. There will be no visual impact on the appearance of land when viewed from Opossum Road. The golf club is privately owned land. There were several comments in the submissions that seem to indicate that public land would be impacted as a result of this. However, there's no public land which will be rezoned as general residential as part of this application. The subdivision does not remove any vegetation. There is only remnant vegetation around the edge of the proposed new lot, and none of this vegetation is being impacted by the proposed works. We've conducted an Aboriginal heritage search through Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania, which confirmed there were no registered relics on the site, nor was there any risk of impacting on possible relics. We maintain that the rezoning of a large portion of level and serviceable land within close proximity to Kings Meadows, which is a major activity centre, is an appropriate and sustainable use of the site. The golf club will continue to function without impact as a result of the development. We therefore request that councillors vote in line with the recommendation and allow this application to progress to the TPC hearings, which allow us to have an open discussion between council, ourselves and the representatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Tate.
Mr Mayor and councillors, look, I'm appealing to councillors today with your planning hats on very firmly and very please untilted. This and the other development proposed for the Launceston Golf Course land is already legally contentious, as the land is listed under the Land Conservation Act 2002, and also it's on the Tasmanian Government website list maps as a private sanctuary, wildlife sanctuary in perpetuity, and that's been since 1934. There are at least 2 threatened and vulnerable species under the Federal EPBC Act that use this land. The recreational land zone is on a soil type and a vegetation community that only occurs on small patches around Launceston and the Northern Midlands. It is listed as threatened under the Forest Practices Act. The decision to convert the land, represents the failings of our state government policies versus federal government commitment via the EPBC Act, as limited and unreformed as it currently is, and the lack of state and environmental report for Tasmania, which is the responsibility of TPC. So this issue is within the scope of your planning responsibility. Councils acting as a planning authority have every right to be cautious with rushing through a rezoning for this land, and to reconsider the focus of the planning report. I think you have every right to reconsider the planning report, which is slanted towards the preponderance of residential development at any cost, and the loss of open space, amenity and natural values. This is a serious and fatal matter for our wildlife and for our own well-being, and likewise the integrity of our council and the Planning Commission. What at stake here is a principle, and if I had the finances to legally contest that decision at another level, I would. Is it nearly time? So I want to say that what should go along with this development is some provisions for rehabilitation on the edge of the golf course to complement what's already been done on the other side of Kings Meadows Rivulet. I wanted to say more about that, but I've run over. Thank you.
Yeah, your time's up. Thank you very much. Any other speakers? I think that's it. So someone happy to move 9.2? Move Councillor Harris. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor? Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So this development application has come back to us again as part of its rezoning process, shall we say. The community has had its chance to have a say. We've heard that Woolcock and in fact our own planning staff have responded to those concerns that were being raised, and all of them have been addressed or dismissed as such. Now then, thank you to James for that, but also thank you for Helen for raising what you have raised. It is interesting about the, where does the line draw between local, state and federal politics, and overlays, environmental plans and what have you. However, when I look at this land that is just down the road from me, it is privately owned, basically just grass, where many members for a long time have used it as a driving range, if you like. And whilst I can appreciate the runoffs and everything else, to me, this subdivision, as extending the additional housing onto the privately owned golf course at the moment, doesn't really change a lot other than there'll be perhaps more runoff because there'll be more roofs. So from that point of view, our report said that the infrastructure around that can handle it. From a sewerage, from a stormwater point of view, all of the reports have indicated that that is still possible. So I'm quite comfortable with what we're doing here as far as the rezoning of this land. The interesting questions that you asked earlier about the 5% and whatever it is perhaps of interest and answered by Mr Jamieson, but it is something that I feel this is almost the end of it. I don't think the golf club could seriously look at changing other boundaries, developing more housing on their golf club, but over time, golf courses move. And so over time, you know, we may end up losing this native wildlife corridor. And the part that's being rezoned today is probably not the main part of any native wildlife's movement, because they would be joining further up at the other end of the course where it's quite into the Punch Bowl Reserve, and of course across the road then to the Carvilla Reserve. So to me, we should succeed. We should proceed, I should say, with this development and approve the rezoning of the land into the 3 lots that they've asked for.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Dawkins.
At what point during this process would the EPBC interact? Would it be when individual houses are put forward in the planning scheme? Would it be at the next stage of consultation?
Thank you. Richard?
There'd have to be some evidence that an EPBC trigger exists, which I don't believe has been shown. The EPBC Act is an act that binds the landowner and prevents the landowner from doing certain actions that are detrimental to EPBC values. It's not a factor that's generally taken into account in planning decisions, although if there is a known trigger for an EPB assessment, then it would be certainly wise for us to look at that. There's no evidence of that, to my knowledge.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, I rise to support what is before us, to making a recommendation to the TPC subsequent to the 3 people who provided additional thoughts during the exhibition period for including the developer. I think what's important to understand from my perspective is that the process allows for members of the community to bring forward issues and then for them to be interrogated. This then comes back to us as it does today and is incorporated in what is sent to the TPC. And certainly appreciating the rigour that the developers have put into the provision of responses, indeed our planners, and the way that it's been dealt with. So I see no reason other than to support it today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Questions, please, Mayor. This rezoning process, if it was, you know, let's say wanting to be rezoned to commercial, for example, the process would naturally be quite different. The recommendations, would they be different?
Richard?
So when we're considering a rezoning application, there's a series of things that we need to be comfortable with. Primary to that is the Northern Region Land Use Strategy. Now that's a document that sits above all planning schemes in the Northern Region and sets out the goalposts for which the planning schemes or the objectives that the planning scheme should achieve, and it has a series of policies by which this will be assessed. So key to that is that we are prioritising urban consolidation. This land is ideal for urban consolidation. Now, if a proposal came up that acquired land in McHugh Street, wanted to look at a consolidated rezoning to expand Kings Meadows to provide additional retail to a growing city, that may well be also appropriate. These things have to be taken on its merits. It's unlikely that if an isolated block of land on the golf course was rezoned to commercial, in the absence of any direct connectivity to Kings Meadows Centre, that would be appropriate. But there could be an expansion of Kings Meadows from a retail perspective at some point. You know, it was only 10 years ago when we were looking to try and put Big W in there, and some of this land was had a look at that point. That ultimately didn't go ahead, but the option to expand our activity centres will always be there if necessary. So it does depend on the outlines, but at the moment, residential consolidation around activity centres is a preferred strategy. This certainly aligns with that objective. And so, from a principles perspective, we would be happy to recommend support for it.
Thanks, Richard.
And if I may, of course, at this stage, with the rezoning, it's noted that there's no vegetation removal, but of course, down the track, that may be a different case if, you know, lots are being developed and individuals that wish to remove certain vegetation. Is there any scenic protection on the existing vegetation?
Richard.
I don't have the planning maps in front of me. Is that something, do you know that? No. Well, I'm informed by James, who would know, that no, there is no scenic management.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. No other speakers? Oh, Councillor Walker.
Yes, I would like to speak to this. Of course, for the people who live in that area, they bought those houses, they live in those houses, knowing that they mostly, well, all of them, I think, backing onto an area that's zoned recreational. And I suppose there's no guarantees in life. These things can change, and in this case, this may well change. But it's not to say that it doesn't impact the amenity of those people. As we just, you know, alluded to, it may well be that the vegetation that they're also concerned about may be removed at some point too, and that will have very little protection. So that additionally will impact on their amenity, probably not just the amenity, maybe even the value of their property to some degree. So that is problematic. I can fully understand why the golf club may wish to pursue this path. It's a big open space. They've got enough room to continue what they do and to, you know, section this area off. But that doesn't mean as a council that we necessarily agree to the rezoning away from the recreational use. If it is not to be used by the golf course for recreational use, then there may well be another user who would like to use it in the future for residential use, and you know, who may choose to rent it or buy it from the golf course in that case. But I suppose my difficulty with this is that on the one hand, the recommendation states, if you'll just bear with me for a second, in the conclusion, the representations have been considered and it's been determined that there are no reasons for the council not to proceed. But there are reasons, and that is the ongoing protection of a recreational area that has been deemed recreational for good reason, and the ongoing protection of vegetation, which at this stage, of course, is not under threat. But it not just perhaps will be, but likely will be in the future, and this is the beginning of that process. Now, I understand there is a need for residential development in our city, and some of that has taken place, and more of it will take place in the future. Whether or not you agree that this is the appropriate place for that to occur, I agree, it's close to a built-up business area, but it's also a part of a recreational area. And I suppose that's the question that councillors have to ask themselves today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
No.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? That's 1 against. Councillor Walker, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. Move on to 9.3. No speakers for this one. 9.3. Someone happy to move the motion? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, Mayor. This is a property that's been, I guess, proposed to be built on a block of land which has been recently subdivided and boundaries the southern outlet. If you go through all the planning aspects of the thing, the buildings and pretty well everything else fits the planning scheme or meets the compliance under any performance criteria that are required, other than the scenic protection. As we drove along there today, it's quite clear that taking those trees, there are an avenue of trees that protect the eastern side of the highway coming in, for which the removal of trees is a part of the DA that's been put forward for us today. And quite frankly, based on the scenic protection aspects, the council planners have recommended the proposal for refusal, and I tend to agree.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Thank you. Yes, just on the scenic protection aspect, the problem is that if you take these trees down to build your large shed, and I think it's 10 or 12 metres squared, and not only that, but 5.8 metres high, which is very high, and it would be very visible from the highway. And yet we are trying to present to visitors and residents along the highway a scenic route of the avenue of trees. Unfortunately, what has been proposed excavates up to 1.8 metres right up to within 300 or 600 millimetres of the backyard of the back fence. So very little room to replant any trees that might replace the large ones that were there. And so to me, I'm quite happy. I don't normally like to not agree with someone's planning application, but I think in this case, it doesn't have my support, and I encourage the applicant to go back and perhaps revisit what he's planning to see whether in fact a smaller version of the shed in a different location may well meet his needs just as well, because that is really at this stage not meeting the scenic protection. And if we allow this small wedge to disappear, next thing you know, the house next door says, you did it for them, what about me? And suddenly all of those trees along that scenic protection, which was put in and known when they bought the blocks of land, that those trees were part of the scenic protection zone. So they should have planned accordingly. So yes, I'm happy to support the non-support of this development application.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. So, Mayor's announcements, just to... there was a lot of events and functions on the last fortnight, which is fantastic. I just want to say the Junction Arts Festival program was launched, and Councillor Walker and Councillor Priest and Harris, I think, were there. It was a great night. Councillor Dawkins was there as well. No, it was a great night, and they've got an exciting program. I think that's an important part about Junction coming up not that far away into our city, and the way they work with areas of our town, Princes Square and around Princes Square, and the way they continue to have local talent and use local artists as well is exciting. So, yeah, looking forward to that in the not too distant future. On the Sunday the 31st, it was really great to go to the Jolly Jelly Beans Variety Show, hosted by the Northern Suburbs Community Centre. And that was fantastic. I don't know if any other councillors got to go to see it. They had a couple of shows. I went to one, and it was amazing. They did a fantastic job, and to see the passion and the excitement, the enthusiasm, and how they've developed in that area is incredible. So, yeah, really great. It just continues to show, I mean, the whole fortnight's been about the theatre a lot and a lot of talent that we have in this city. So, really fantastic, and it was great to be there. On the Tuesday, Wednesday of last week, we accompanied Her Excellency, the Honourable Barbara Baker, AC, to a number of sites around our city, and she was fantastic, and it was great to introduce her and to have her hear something about what our local community is doing. And her and her husband were very open to listening and to offering advice, and it was just a fantastic time together. On the Wednesday the 3rd, did attend the film Some Happy Day, put on by the Benevolent Society, and the Deputy Mayor was there as well. And plus, not only the film, there were some interviews and a little bit about the story of some of the homeless in our city as well, and that was certainly an eye-opener. Certainly shows you the challenges that are there, which we know as a council, and it shows you that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. So it was worth going to, and thank the Benevolent Society for that. Again, agriculture was in town, did a great show, went to a few of their workshops, and also attended the fire and fog night in the Civic Square. Amazing, there was a fantastic group of people there, a lot of people there. It was incredible, and we were lucky the rain cleared as the day went on, and so it was a fantastic night, and really appreciate the work that's gone into doing that. And then last night, another production, the Launceston College Rent. Again, just shows you what local talent we have with Launceston College, and all this, I don't know how many, Danny might know how many numbers of 104 students were involved. Does that include the band? They're all local in the band, apart from one person, I think I was told. So local students in our beautiful city who are out there using the skills they have, and the talent was fantastic. I thought it was faultless, and it was a great production. So the way our city has grown in productions over the last 10 to 15 years is quite amazing. So it's incredible. So it was really worth going to, and if you haven't been, I encourage you to go in the next few days, as it'll be on again. That's it from me. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. 3 things from me. The first is I wanted to pick up on the official launch of the UNESCO City of Gastronomy for Launceston and indeed Northern Tasmania. Councillors will recall, of course, that we recently recommitted our support financially to the development of the action plan and the second year of our support of the City of Gastronomy, and it was wonderful under the leadership of new Chair Jane Bennett to come together with a variety of players and a variety of different other neighbouring councils to begin the journey formally, to recognise what it is that we can achieve, linked with tourism, linked with food security, linked with all of the things that we're aiming to do in terms of our broad action plan for the City of Gastronomy. The second thing, Mayor, is as the City of Launceston representative on the Launceston College Association, to thank you for your words about the production of Rent. It's been a huge undertaking. Some of you will remember that the school began rehearsals for that production in masks outside at Royal Park in order to fit the density requirements. So to see last night the fact that they made it to the end with a very vibrant production on stage was testament to those efforts, and I know Principal Vicky Mackerel will be very thrilled to hear your wonderful comments. And the third, Mayor, is something that I know you won't like, but I hope you'll appreciate it regardless. On behalf of councillors around the table, would like to acknowledge your announcement on Sunday in serving our city with distinction for the last 15 years as Mayor. Your deep, unwavering commitment to our city, to its people, to the community, to business, has been faultless, and you should be congratulated for all that you've achieved in the role of Mayor. And of course, the job isn't done yet. There's still some weeks ahead of you, but we wish you all the best the next phase of life, and I'm sure there'll be time to say much more in the weeks ahead. But to recognise that announcement, to thank you and Lyndall, who in her role as Mayoress has done an outstanding job advocating and supporting the city and you. So on behalf of councillors around the table, I'm sure they will join with me in thanking you most sincerely for the work that you've done for this city. Thank you.
I do thank you, but I do remind councillors this is a brief report on activities of the council. Okay, any other? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And I just wanted to highlight, and I'm going to endorse the comments made by the Deputy Mayor, but just wanted to highlight the Governor's visit. I was fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of the day with her, and she came out to the Northern Suburbs Community Centre, and I have to say how proud I was of the participants, the people that work and volunteer out there, and their presentation to the Governor. The Governor was extremely engaged, as was her husband, into all the activities that are undertaken by the centre, and actually received back a handwritten note from her today saying how much she enjoyed that, and also sort of wandered her through the through the new library of UTAS's with Councillor Harris later in the day, and I think she was just eyeing all the artwork that was around there and thinking that Government House needed an update in its artwork. So I think she was looking at some of the Aboriginal activities that had gone on in there and thinking there might be some good opportunities for her to update the art collection of Government House. But I thought that was fantastic. And I just, I went along to the launch of Agricultured with the Mayor and others on Friday morning, and Adam Lior, who spoke as the keynote speaker there, was just superb, the way he spoke about food and how it actually engages all parts of our community. And he thought the agri part, the food part and the cultured part all fitted so well together, and I thought his articulation of his journey and how that all fitted in was well. And I know Councillor Dawkins was engaged in the agriculture program. I didn't get to go and see her, but I'm sure it went very, very well indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the launch of Junction, the Governor's visits and the agriculture at Liao were certainly great highlights, but they've already been mentioned. I will mention the AFL game between Hawthorn and the Suns out there at UTAS Stadium on Saturday. The crowd wasn't great, but it was a great game. Got close at the end for those who were Hawthorn supporters. But I did have a meeting with, an unintended meeting with Peter Boxall, the president of the Lilydale Football Club, who wanted to pass on his congratulations and thanks for the council staff for the work that's been done at the Lilydale ground to enable it to host finals for the first time in 40 years, as far as that goes. So Peter's been working hard at there for a number of years, and he just wanted to pass all that on. Peter is also my news agent, so I didn't actually set up a meeting, I just walked into the news agency and we had quite a discussion about it. But for anyone who's listening, certainly if you want to get to the finals, the other final is down at St Helens, so Lilydale will be the close one.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports on activities of council? No? We'll move on then. Questions by councillors. Questions? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a series of questions in regards to 41 to 45 Patterson Street, and I'm more than happy for those to be taken on notice if required. I mean, yeah, see what happens. But the recent premature conclusion of a federal court case regarding 41 to 45 Patterson Street, has that impacted Launceston Council's involvement and for the provision of a bus exchange as part of the project?
No.
Will the council now consider recommending that the $10 million Building Better Regions Fund Round 4 drought round funding be returned?
That will be a matter for council in due course when more details are known of what is happening.
Thank you. Has the CEO had discussions with the relevant minister or department in regards to the ongoing eligibility to the grant?
CEO? No.
Is the Coordinator General still involved in negotiating an outcome for this project?
CEO? I'm not aware, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? No? We'll move on then. Notice a motion from Councillor Gibson. We have a person to speak, Christian Rowell. Christian, welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name's Christian Rao. I live on the northwest coast. I've been a skateboarder for my whole entire life. I'm here to support the idea of a new skate park in Launceston. So I've helped the Central Coast Council to redevelop the new Ulverston facility that they have there. And I just believe that the life that's been brought into the area now is just amazing. And I think that Launceston can really benefit from having something like this done here. I think that it brings a lot of opportunity to kids, gives them options as well. And the point of entry, the cost of entry into these sports on a skate park is a lot lower than, say, your mountain biking, where it could be like $3,000 plus per kid. And it's more accessible. So kids can get to the skate park themselves. It really is a great community. I think that the opportunities that can come from a new skate park can really help these kids express themselves that don't enjoy other conventional sports. And yeah, I just want to sort of change the perception of skateboarding and the skate park environment, and sort of be here to kind of, yeah, give a bit of a better representation of that area, because the way skateboarding or these skate park sports are around the world at the moment, they are growing and they're Olympic sports. And other states around Australia are really pushing for these facilities, and the support that they get from them is, yeah.
Good. Well on. Right on your time. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you.
So moved, Deputy Mayor. Second, Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Look, just briefly, everything I really want to say is contained within the agenda item that has been prepared and certainly supported by the Speaker just then, and indeed the comments that have been circulated to councillors by local businessman and skater Hamish McKean, which I certainly appreciate as well. Essentially, people tell me that the Launceston Skate Park is a much-loved facility, but it's past its use-by date and requires some immediate and long-term infrastructure upgrades to ensure that it is everything that it is and can be for our community. The opportunity that other councils have seen by investing funds into the development or the creation of upgraded skate parks is very evident. Rosny, Ulverston, St Mary's and Georgetown have recently all had significant upgrades to their facilities and are reaping the rewards. What needs to happen here is set out in 3 steps as contained within the recommendation: that we immediately investigate operational issues such as drainage and initiate immediate works with regard to those; that within 3 months we advise the renewal planning timelines for this important facility to ensure that the needs and expectations of our community are continued through replacement; and thirdly, that we investigate and report in the latter part of this year the upgrade options to this facility, to this loved facility, including the necessary budgetary costings that can then be incorporated into the future. I think importantly, it's of note that a variety of different users frequent the Launceston Skate Park and they love it. Everything from visitors to families to students, and indeed, as we saw in an email that came from a user, people in their 40s as well, which is just wonderful and above, I'm sure. But that whilst it was probably at the top of its game when it was opened in 1999, like everything, it requires a little bit of love and a little bit of investment. And so this motion, and you've seen the response from the officers, asks us to do some immediate work in terms of drainage so that it can still be used, and to do some planning so that into our forward estimates, into our forward long-term planning, we can incorporate some budgetary elements to have the facility upgraded.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess it's a question for the CEO because he's the one who's got to write the report. The email we received today from Hamish, I think it was, thank you, suggested that we should consider relocating the skate park to the other side of the flood wall, which I had never considered up until that email. But the more I thought about it, the better it seems, because you then have access to the afternoon sun. You do have much more surveillance from people using the boardwalk and other playground areas. So my question is, can the CEO, under item 3, to investigate to report on the options, will he be able to include relocation of it? Because rebuilding an existing skate park is difficult. Building a new one on a greenfield site and removing the old one is probably a cheaper option long term.
Thank you. CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So whilst I'm responsible for the motion, I doubt it will be me that writes the report. But you know, there's a whole range of issues and considerations and engagement that will form part of that. So you really wouldn't rule anything in or out at the moment, but certainly in answer to your question, you know, those are options which can certainly be looked at. So,
thank you, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I apologise, Councillor Dawkins. I know you have a vested interest as your children use it, and mine have been skateboarders over the journey as well. But I think activity and things for youth to do are something very significant and important in the city. I think the note that it actually is Olympic sport as well is another thing which I think gives an aspirational aspect for people, like we do with other sports grounds, for other sports that actually do create Olympic and Commonwealth champions, as we have, and we should have actually noted that in the things of the number of people in this area that actually performed very well at the Commonwealth Games recently. But I think that timely, and it's great that it's been raised. I think that dot point 3 encompasses a broad range of things that they can look at, and there should be nothing ruled in or ruled out until we've actually gone through the exercise. I can see some possibilities and some problems associated, particularly where we do other activities on Royal Park, as well as to where you might locate it. But again, I think that 1999 is a long time ago. I've just recently seen new facilities built in Dorset Council at Bridport, and they've got another one. They've actually got two. They've got now concrete ones and ones made of iron there. So it's something that, and very well utilised. And I walk and used to ride a lot up and down Kings Park there and see where the skateboarders, and it's always been well used by people over there. Like anywhere, there'll be some subversive activities in most of the things that go on somewhere along the line. Hopefully it's not too much in this thing, but we need to make sure that we protect our young by ensuring that the things that shouldn't be going on in that area don't.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Yes, there's no doubt this is a much-loved facility for young people and older people in Launceston. What I love about it, having sort of grown up alongside it in the 70s and 80s, came from that kind of cool dude masculinity culture, but over the years it's really broadened, and so now there are young women and older women who skate on a variety of different apparatus. So I think it's really important to that price point so that anyone can skate. It really is a reasonable thing for anybody to indulge in that kind of activity, which is physically really good for them, but also socially excellent. And what we know is the broader range of people who interact with an activity, the less likely it is that some of those things that we hear about activity down at the skate park are likely to happen. I've also really enjoyed the way that the graffiti wall's grown. I know that it was really problematic to start with. You know, people were obviously, there's a real intersection between skater culture and street art. And, you know, kudos to council for saying, well, look, rather than constantly be at people, you're doing the wrong thing, you know, looking in people's bags to see whether or not they're carrying around paint, let's give them a space to be able to do it. You know, I think that, and you can see how people really kind of push back on that for a long time rather than going, let's just enable the activity. So I think skating has really allowed local government to be able to interact with a part of the community that might not have if we hadn't taken these steps. And I really want to see this continue, because there's no doubt that councils are competing now in skate parks, aquatic centres, mountain bike riding, you know, and I think it's a great thing for the community to have so many councils saying, I want to be as good as you, or I want to do better. So thank you for bringing the motion. I think it's excellent, it's certainly timely, and look forward to reading the report.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And you know, for the brief time that I skated down there, there was only a half pipe. It's a massive. I think it's still down there. I could never drop in on that thing because it was felt like a 3 metre drop at the time. But it has certainly improved over the years, and it wasn't that long ago that Launceston Council did a later iteration and made some additions down at Royal Park. Nonetheless, I do welcome Councillor Gibson's notice of motion, and I congratulate him on that. I would like to test the floor and see if I could amend the motion ever so slightly, just to include that officers consider future incorporation of skate design elements in future developments of public spaces. So it's just because I do believe that there are many cities now that do include these elements in their design, and it's something whereby you can accommodate many of the things that have been mentioned, which is the improvement of access of these types of facilities for people. And while it might be that we will ultimately decide to to revamp what's already there, and that's a great thing. It's also the case that that many cities around the world do now incorporate scape design in their public spaces as a matter of course. So I'd just like to test the floor and see if anyone would consider seconding that motion. That amendment.
Well, it's not really an amendment, it's a separate motion altogether, I believe, so I don't think we can have a seconder on that. Do you wish to continue speaking, or...?
Well, I believe it's just I have no problems with the motion as it stands.
Good.
I think that's great. I'm quite happy to move a separate, notice of motion to that effect at a later date.
Yeah.
And that's fine as well. But I don't see it as changing the intent of the existing motion. It's just an addendum to it, and it is another way in which council can provide these facilities in public spaces.
I'll get the CEO to explain as well.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So what this motion is dealing with is specific to the skate park in Royal Park. What you're proposing is something that is municipal-wide and requires professional advice and consideration before we could commit to that. So therefore, it's not an amendment. It's a new consideration.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close.
Just briefly, thanks Mayor and thanks to other councillors for their contribution. Look, this is essentially about just improving the great asset that we already have. It's reiterated in the officer comments that there is a need to look at some things immediately with regard to drainage. There is a recognition that this is a well-utilised, much-loved facility, and that by flying the flag and putting it on the radar, we can look to ensure it's fit for purpose and the best that it can be into the future. So commend the motion to the table and hope colleagues will support it.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.2, notice of motion on the Suburban Business District's green spaces. Councillor Walker, moving.
Thank you, Mayor, and I wish to rise to actually move an amended motion as per the officer's comments, a suggested alternative motion. I'm sure it's not an amended motion, an alternative motion.
Alternative motion, that's correct.
I'll get my terminology correct.
That's good. As per there. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. I do. But before you move very quickly on the seconding, I was going to add a definitive date to that alternative motion.
Oh, you better. Okay, sorry. You better explain what that is before the.
Well, just at the last sentence, and this is on page 53 of our agenda, that the Chief Executive Officer to investigate the need and options that exist to deliver additional green spaces, with a report to be provided back to Council. And I'm quite prepared to take advice from the CEO as to what that date should be at the end of
I'll put a date there.
Sentence.
I purposely left it without a date because we're moving into an election period. There's a lot of work on that we're working through at the moment. So the commitment is that we will come back to council, and certainly that will happen. But that's why there's no date.
Councillor Harris, wish to agree with the amendment or addition?
We haven't got a date. Then
we'll leave it as is. Thank you.
As it is,
do you wish to speak to the motion, then, Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I certainly do wish to speak to it. This is something that's come out of previous council activity, especially that that relates to our memorandum of understanding with the Chamber of Commerce. And if I can just briefly quote from a council media release at the time, this is going back to May this year, that the memorandum of understanding seeks to enhance Launceston green spaces by increasing the number of street trees, plantings and arbour systems across the urban realm. This applies to Launceston Central activity area as well as precincts like Mowbray and Kings Meadows. And of course, when we look at some of our suburban areas, it's not always easy to see where this may take place, and I suppose that was the genesis for this particular notice of motion, that it is time that Council takes a proactive and positive step forward. It's fantastic that we seem united in wanting to green Launceston, and when it comes to the CBD, certainly some of that work has been done. Certainly we do have established parks and green areas in the CBD, but when it comes to our suburban centres, I think that there is certainly a dearth of these things. There's a lack of green spaces, and it would be prescient of us to do whatever we can and to take what steps we can moving forward to try and make allowances for that. It might not be easy in some areas, and I think everyone accepts that. I wasn't wanting to be so prescriptive as to name an area or to, you know, or a style or a size or anything like that, but just to adopt it as council policy and to see that we can move forward over time to enhance those areas which are becoming, if you like, central business districts of their own for people. People are choosing to shop and to work, to meet, to play in those areas, not necessarily always coming to the CBD. So they increasingly are becoming destinations for people, and they do require that greening perhaps more so than our central business district. So I thank the CEO for the alternative motion, and I accept that it is a busy time for council, and it's also early days as far as you know, planning for such a thing as this goes. It does need to be incorporated into our Greater Launceston plan. It does have to dovetail with our open spaces strategy. All of these things are things that need to be reviewed and developed. And so I put the motion to the table in the hands of the Chief Executive Officer to recommend the best way in which that can be moved forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Walker, for moving this motion. Yes, it's a interesting motion, and I guess I'll relate back to planting trees. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is to plant a tree today, and that will be for the benefit of those in 20 years' time. And in fact, what we are doing today is planting a tree that will probably benefit those in 20 years' time, and we may not ourselves ever get to enjoy the benefit of it. Modern suburban shopping centres, when viewed from Google satellite, just resemble car parks with buildings stuck in them. And unfortunately, they're a pretty an unfriendly place for pedestrians and for families unless you arrive and leave in a car. So I think having this on our agenda, that's something that we are looking at. We might not move immediately on it, but knowing that it's there and knowing that that's where the council wants to head could mean that future development then says, perhaps we could put that green space instead of the car park. And then from that green space, the reorganisation of that particular area to centre it around the green space, because that is obviously the ideal solution for these major shopping centres in Mowbray and Kings Meadows. St Leonard's, of course, will grow in time, and in the next 20 years we expect it to be much bigger than it is now. And on that one, we actually have the opportunity to perhaps be somewhat proactive and include it in our planning, that we do actually have green space available to us to whatever a new St Leonard shopping area may look like. Newstead, also growing. There's probably some others, but they are the ones that have been listed in the motion, and I'm happy to support all of those. And I'm looking forward to support around the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to our CEO. Are all the things that this motion is trying to achieve, are they covered off in our memorandum of understanding with the Chamber?
CEO.
Not specifically the identification of new areas of green space or open space. Certainly the planting, the commitment to plant and provide additional greening is, but so this is slightly expanded what we would look at.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie wishes to speak.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Mayor. Look, I rise to support the motion, but I just do make a few comments in relation to it. Two things: we've had A, B, C, D, E in Mowbray, and we've had A, B, C, D, E in Kings Meadows, and I don't think in either of those green spaces were actually raised as a burning issue for those areas. Not to say that we shouldn't consider it, so I just note that the community didn't actually bring that up as a resounding issue. And I guess the other thing, And maybe that's because when you actually look around, say, Kings Meadows, you've got the Kings Meadows rivulet, there are actually places to recreate. They walk up and around Carvilla, and the Carvilla itself is a recreational area, not right in the shopping centres. And again, you know, just musing and thinking that, is that more because our planning scheme doesn't actually provide for these sorts of things as being parts of these sorts of developments going forward? So that's just amusing that a planning scheme doesn't necessarily have that sort of stuff involved, and it does when it comes to residential, has public open space and so forth covered, but maybe not for commercial. I'm only just thinking about these, but I think it's a worthwhile thing for us to consider and have a look at. But even as part of that, a further thing is looking at the green spaces that actually exist in the surrounds of these areas that you've talked about, and maybe developing them, given that it's difficult to grow a tree 20 years after you should have planted it, Councillor Harris, that there may be something we can utilise within what we've already got, and rather than spending a lot of money to build and buy something else, to actually just improve what we've got better and make it more user-friendly for those people in the community. But I just think that's just something that should be thrown into the mix, but otherwise I support the intent of the motion.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, like Councillor McKenzie, I certainly support the intent, but I note that already a lot of this work is being encapsulated in things such as the GLP, the open space strategy, and indeed the provision for work with regard to the urban design framework. And I think what this alternate motion, which I'm surprised but thrilled that the mover has opted to go with, well done, is that it allows for us to develop the evidence and to undertake a kind of an analysis of the costing, also appreciating that we have a variety of green spaces in our suburbs that many, in fact, Councillor McKenzie during the ABCDE said that they would love to see enhanced and cared for, you know, if there was more resource. So absolutely agree with the principles of urban greening. I think that's certainly no question. But I'm very appreciative that we've gone with an alternate motion that I think encapsulates the rigour that's required to ensure that we can, you know, deliver in advance the objective that Councillor Walker is desiring, and I think all of us are desiring.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to close?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the positive comments around the table. I certainly do think, and it did occur to me that yes, we have been doing consultation in some of these areas, but it may not be the case that, you know, a strategy on this level is something that was being considered, especially when you look at some of these built-up areas. It may mean that the council ultimately have to make an investment. It might be a purchase of land, or it might be a land swap. Who's to know what the future holds there? But it's certainly a significant gesture may be involved, and therefore, when it comes to the learning sites, it might not have been as strategic as that, I suppose, or as blue sky thinking as that. I'm not to know. Certainly at Kings Meadows, council does have a certain amount of opportunity there already in terms of land that is part of local council. And, you know, I suppose individually speaking, I don't think we need evidence to know that parks are a good thing. That's not to say that we don't need to do the work in regards to other considerations, whether it be, and I note the CEO in his rationale for not recommending my initial motion did say that singling out one element such as provision of open space without considering all relevant considerations such as the need for economic expansion, transport requirements and other land uses may compromise the optimum outcome, and I'm quite willing to accept that there are considerations that may be beyond my understanding, that may be only found through that process. So I welcome that process to begin, and I hope that my fellow councillors do also. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We have 14.1, Fees and Charges Amendment. Someone happy to move? Moved, Councillor Harris. Seconded. Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Harris, wish to speak to it?
Yes, thank you. It appears others haven't quite caught up and my laptop has my tablet is frozen too. This is an amendment to introduce a pro rata charge for our fees and charges for CBD curbside collection, which we don't currently have, simply because previously when it was introduced there was only a quarter to go and so there was no thought to it. But now businesses are establishing themselves during the year and as such need to be, well, they really only want to pay a pro rata charge. So it really is just a simple amendment to our fees and charges to enable a more fair way of new businesses to access those curbside collection services.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Logical and sensible approach.
Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Northern Tasmanian Waste Management Group Council Report 14.2. Moved Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie.
Oh, look, I think the report speaks for itself in that it's just really saying that now we've moved on to the state system, we needed to look at the way that we do these things and make sure that we're seen as being hands-off in relation to the way we do it, and I think therefore moving our waste management across to NRM North makes sense and puts into an independent body, and therefore I think just sort of legitimises what we actually already do very, very well. It's a pity in some ways, and because I think our officers do a fantastic job in the waste management aspects of it, and I know that we'll still be involved. But you know, I think that Mick and others in the team, I think, do a fantastic job. So I'm not sure how that all works out in due course, but the reality of it is that this is probably a sensible way to go given the new changes at the state level.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Nothing further to add.
Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 14.3, Launceston Flood Authority Report. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Harris. Seconded. Councillor Dawkins. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, this is a report. I think it's a annual report from memory. Quarterly report, yes, thank you, for the up to March. So these are things that we received that indicates what's going on with our flood management. We are lucky that we have a good organisation and chairman in running the flood management, and I think the reports are all there for us to read. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins. Any other? Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, I just think it's just worthy of noting in there that there is a write-off, I think it's a levy, something or other there, which will actually lead to a end-of-year loss for the flood authority, just based on the fact that you're writing off an asset, even though performance and operational sense would actually perform well. We're just noting that there is a write-off of an asset which will show a loss in the accounts.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
I don't think everyone need to hear that.
Any other speakers? Councillor Harris wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 15.1, closure of a portion of a highway. Someone happy to move? Move Councillor Harris. Seconded Councillor Walker. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Yes, briefly. This is one where we visited as part of our bus trip a fortnight ago at 37 Salisbury Crescent. For those listening, Salisbury Crescent is a narrow, winding road up to West Launceston. It is already subject to having speed humps and a 40km/h speed limit because of the nature of the road. It would be extremely difficult to widen the road from its current width. And the request from the new owners of number 37, I suspect, because it had a for sale sign in the front yard that looked a little old, was to enable them to build a off-road parking area at the front of their property, and in doing so they would encroach into some highway. Now this is not highway as in the flat sense that you would drive on it. This is highway because it's the edge of the road before it drops off down to the property. And so this is a common sense response to a problem of how to park additional vehicles at a property that is at 37 Salisbury Crescent. Interestingly, we don't actually own the road. That actually is part of state growth, I assume, but we as the authority have to give our permission for it. So it's a common sense response to a difficult problem for the people at 37 Salisbury Crescent, and it should enable them to have safer ingress and egress into their property. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I wasn't on the trip that went there, and it may well have been answered in there, but we have had the odd issue with the public highway closure in the past. And I'm just wanting to make sure that in us doing this today, that we're not lending ourselves to another 17 years of something going on that might not be palatable. So just my question is there anything else? Because I think last time this came up in this sense, we had to go to court and do a number of things before we could actually approve the closure of the highway. There's nothing like that that's likely to happen as a result of our decision today.
Robert.
Thanks, Councillor. There's the possibility that someone might raise an objection, and if they do, then it would need to go to court.
For those listening.
Thank you. There will be a notification period required, so the neighbouring residents will be notified. There will also be notification in the local newspaper, so if there are any objections, it will then go to the Magistrates Court. We have sought the applicants to indemnify the council for any reasonable court costs in that scenario. So it really depends on the outcome of that process.
Thank you. Councillor Walker. As seconded, you wish to speak? No? That's all.
I was still pondering the answer to that question. Thank you, Mayor. And look, I did put my hand to second this upon inspection. I can understand people may have concerns, but Launceston is full of these types of roads that are built on the side of hills. They're winding, and in this case, the road, as the mover of the motion said, has a reduced speed, and it also has speed humps, meaning people are already driving cautiously, and this homeowner is looking for a more practical solution for their particular situation. I think it's the case that if it was just the driveway that is crossing the verge, then this wouldn't be required. But this is also a building that will be on what is currently what you call state highway. So that area has to be closed. Please, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the case. That is the crucial part here, that a small part of the garage will end up being on that land. The driveway itself, of course, crosses that, but so do all of our driveways cross public land. So this one happens to be on an angle. Not everyone's is, but some people's are, and that's the case. And of course, there still will be somewhat of what you'd say, not a pathway, because the pathway's on the opposite side of the road in this section here, but certainly wide enough to accommodate a path still if that was ever required. So you'd think that most of those concerns have been met. I suppose the other great concern was just, whether it's going to contribute to, people, visibility and the potential for accidents or anything like that. But in this case, driving in, of course, wouldn't be such a problem, but reversing out, in this case, the proponent is, is able to turn the car around as they come out. So it seems to be that they've thought of all those things. As I began by saying, Launceston is full of these types of less than perfect situations, and we make the best of a bad situation, and we all take care of each other, hopefully, and look out for these unexpected, instances on our road, because they're not always uniform. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, and thanks to the officer for the clarification of my question before. So just noting there is a possibility. I guess the difference between this one and previous ones we've had is nothing's been built on it yet, and therefore there is nothing to be removed in the event that something actually that is challenged in regards to it. So the issue should be resolved by the public notice. And again, my most important thing is to make sure that the notice is clear, because I think there was a perception last time that there might have been shutting down a walkway that people were using and were used to using as well. So as a consequence of that, just making sure the clarity of the notice is there. It's being done before the fact rather than after the fact, which I think is a positive thing in this particular instance. So I'm supportive of the motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
No, other than just to say that the highway closure process that we then initiate then allows the landowner to go to the Crown and purchase that land so they can then build their carport on top of it. If it was just a driveway, they wouldn't have needed to perhaps do that. So, yes, I hope my fellow councillors will support the motion.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 16.1, appointment of coordinator and emergency management people, and a change of a name as well. Anyone wish to move it? Councillor Mackenzie, seconded. Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Well, look, I think this is an operational matter largely, and certainly rise to sort of acknowledge what Peter and Lee have done in that role, in the role that they've done, because they're both very good operators, and look forward to seeing our new Deputy Coordinator and how well she performs.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, anything to add? No. Any other councillor have anything to add? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we now close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.